you've had one of my classes, the next couple of minutes is going to be something you've heard before. So first of all, I'm Dave Cecil. I go by Lord Dave on most of the forums and Twitch. I'm not a regular streamer, but most people around Reaper know who I am. I'm not some legendary painter or really amazing at anything, but I am okay at a whole lot of things. And horror, there's so many aspects of that, so many directions we can take. And I've learned a lot about it over the last few years. So basically, any of my classes, I like to teach using materials that are, in my opinion, easy to source. So things that you can find locally, or maybe even on Amazon or other websites. I like to use products that are cost effective. I don't want to spend a whole bunch on random products that I might use once or twice. I'd rather buy more miniatures. And last, I like to use products that are relatively easy to do a certain effect on, but will come out with some cool result. So in this class, I'm going to show you several ways to do the same thing in several different ways. That's not to say that you have to do every one of those ways on every miniature that you do. This is to give you a group of tools to put in your toolbox. So I see the guy playing Death Guard. There may be 5 or 6 of these that you want to do on a particular group of miniatures, and then another 3 or 4 techniques that you want to try on a different group. So use your own judgment. A lot of these skills can be transferred from your basic tabletop game. You need a bunch of quick, bloody orcs. So things like that, you can do relatively quickly. Maybe you want to compete at a higher level. Well, time permitting, we'll get to something that's a little closer to that with the raindrops and stuff like that. But these skill sets that I'm going to teach, it's really about the amount of time you want to spend on it for the result that you want to get. I'm going to show you some very quick things to do for more of the what I call the battlefield level. And I'll show you some things that take a little more time that you might want to do on some of your dioramas and things like that. Okay, so that said, not everything that we're going to do in this class, you guys following at home will be able to do, because I purposely didn't include some of the things that we're going to do in the description. I didn't include some of the materials because the setup and preparation for that is a bit much to ask for somebody to get ready. So when we get to those, I'll tell you what those are, and just kind of watch along, take notes, ask questions. So again, back to the beginner versus advanced. I'm probably not the best painter in this forum. In fact, I know I'm not, because I see a couple of names that I've seen your work, and there's some amazing, talented people that are part of RBE. But there's also some brand new people in this. So some of the things I go over, it may be something that you've heard before, maybe something that you have done yourself many times, and maybe you've done it a different way. So I ask that you just be patient, let the new folks learn something that they can use. And conversely, when I get to something that seems to be too challenging for somebody new into it, just kind of be patient, maybe take a few notes, and pretty soon you'll be at that level where you'll want to give that a shot. So, and lastly, before we get started, I want to go over a few kind of safety things. Some of the products we're going to use in this, they can cause some problematic issues. So please read warning labels on any product before you use it. That's just common sense. People with sensitive skin or those that are prone to headaches from strong fumes, you may want to take some extra precautions. So gloves would not be a good idea. Maybe a face mask or respirator. You know yourself better than I know. I know you. For example, I'm going to be using this glue at one point. It's called E6000. It's available basically everywhere really cheap. The downside of this, it works really good for these effects, but the downside is it's pretty strong fume, so make sure you're ventilated. I happen to be in a room with an air vent behind me, so I'm pretty good shape here. But if you're doing this at home, make sure you get the window open or something like that, some kind of airflow. But yeah, just use common sense. If you've experienced some kind of skin rash from glues in the past, don't touch the glues. We're not going to, most of the things we're going to do, we're going to be using toothpicks and old paintbrushes. We're not going to actually be touching things with our hands, but you know, accidents can happen. So just be careful. Don't get this stuff on your skin, especially if you're prone to that kind of stuff. Lastly, if you get headaches from strong smells, again, you know yourself. You know what precautions you need to take, or you know what products you need to stay away from. So don't put yourself at risk. Now that said, my skin is really tough. It's kind of like root turkey to the extreme. So I'm not going to wear gloves. I'm not going to be touching these products basically. And if I do, I've never had any trouble with any of these products myself personally. That's not to say that you won't. So again, lastly, just be careful. All right. So now that I've bored you guys with all the safety rules, let's have a pop quiz. No, just kidding. We're going to get right into it. So first of all, I apologize in advance. My screens are to my left. So if I miss a question, there's a question and answer section. Pop it up there, and hopefully we can get those answered. I'll try to keep an eye on it, but sometimes chat goes by so fast that I can't keep up.
As a real quick question,
We may or may not get to.
someone did have a question about if you'll be going over glow effects or anything similar.
If that is one of the topics that I may get to, I have a list of topics that if time permits, I'm going to go over some of that OSL. And to answer that question, it's object source lighting. So if you have, say, this piece here, we're going to be using that for a number of things. But I've got his eyes kind of prepped to do some OSL. If we have time, then I'll go ahead and do that. If not, then that'll be one of the things that we have to skip. I will say this, OSL itself can be an entire class. It's not a very easy technique to master, but if I have some extra time, we'll touch on it, maybe get the basics out of the way. So the other thing I'm not going to really cover much is Undead Flesh. Again, that's an entire subject all to its own, but I'm going to give you some basics because good horror effects kind of starts from, a base somewhere. So what I've got here, you can see there's an array of different zombies. And just really quickly, some of them, their skin looks more dead, more gray, less blood, right? To do that, I kind of started with a base of some kind of medium green. This was olive green. Just painted the whole thing olive green. And then I very lightly used this Undead Flesh to kind of glaze over his skin. And then in the last step, I just gave him a wash with this stone gray paint here. So again, that's another whole topic all to its own, but I want to kind of go through these. And they range from, if you see this one is really gray, and this one has a little bit more red tones to it. So again, I started with the green on this, but then I actually took kind of a lighter pink. I used Brains pink and did the glazes with that. And then again, I washed him with this stone gray to give him that dead, kind of emancipated, bloodless look. And as I went on, I'll skip over a few of these. The last one, I kind of started him out with a purple base because I wanted him to look like he's freshly dead. Then I glazed with kind of a light flesh tone. This is Maiden Flesh. And then washed it with Flesh Wash. Now, the point of all this is when you're doing Undead Flesh, you have to kind of think about what level do you want them to appear dead? Are they fresh kills or have they been walking around for years, out in the weather? And the basic knowledge there is the more alive they are, the closer they are to their previous life, make them a little more red. The further they are from that, make them a little more gray or green. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, so here's one other thing about the paints I use. You don't have to use any specific color for anything I'm teaching. In fact, when we get to the blood, I'm going to show you about 4 or 5 options for that. You don't have to have that exact paint. Use something in the spirit of, right? So something similar to that shade. So you get this stuff out of the way. So let's start with something really easy. If we're going to do horror, we got to have some blood, right? Now there are specifically made products by some companies. Um, so all of my prime and David Ross, I generally prime in black and then use a white ink as a zenithal prime. And then I base coated those other colors. Like for the gray, I did the green, kind of a green base coat followed by layers. But anyway, there are some products out there that make really good, like off the shelf kind of blood effects. But again, those don't really fall into the category of what I call readily available or cost effective, right? They're a little expensive. So what I've done here, and hopefully the lighting on my cameras will work right. This is what we'll call the other leading brand. This is Reaper paint with Reaper gloss sealant. Not a whole lot of difference in there, right? Especially for most of the effects we're doing, that's going to work good enough. This third little piece down here, this is Reaper paint with Mod Podge put over top of it. So as you can see, comparing the three, not a whole lot of difference in there. The Mod Podge is not quite as shiny when mixed with paint. Hopefully you guys can see that. So worried about blood. You have to think about a little bit. How long has that blood been sitting there? Is it dry blood or is it fresh blood? Let's start with fresh blood. Now, luckily for us, Reaper happens to make a color called fresh blood. That or some brilliant red, that's going to give you kind of an impact that viewers are wanting to see. It's not necessarily true to life, but it's what people are expecting to see. So especially if you're in competitions, sometimes realism isn't exactly what a judge is used to seeing. If there's fresh blood, like say a blood spray coming off of something, they're expecting it to be a little more red. If it's dried, it will tend to be a lot more dark, maybe even tending towards, a deep red. So all we do to make our blood effect very simple, I took a little of that fresh blood, I mix a little of this gloss sealer with it, just a 1-to-1 ratio. Very simple stuff. And just kind of mix that in. And you can see this is kind of a bright red, a little bright for my taste on things. But if you wanted to have something look like it was freshly bleeding, this is what people would be expecting to see. So let me show you what I would prefer. I would use one of these darker ones. Now, unfortunately, my favorite one, gory red, is no longer available. So I'm not even going to use that. But any of these, clotted red, deep red, something like that would work pretty good for what I would like to use on my gore. Again, total preference. So let's go over here on the palette a little bit. And again, for all you experienced painters, I know this is kind of old hat for you. So I appreciate your patience. And yes, Big Top Red is a good choice. So yeah, mixing this together, you can see how much darker that is. To me, that just looks better. But again, it's preference. And maybe you want yours somewhere in the middle. So it's okay to mix those. So the very basic thing about horror, if you look at any like B-movie horror thing, is some kind of blood splatters. This is the simplest thing to do. So what I got here is just a piece of floor-based tile. Take your little blood mixture. You want that kind of runny. So I'm going to add a drop of water. So now it's 1 drop of water, 1 drop of paint, 1 drop of seal. You can see how loaded up that brush is, right? So that's going to be too much. What you want to do is get a piece of paper towel. A second old beat up brush. By the way, use old brushes for this stuff. Do not use some, Winsor Newton, $25 brush, because these effects will beat up your brushes. So I've got this loaded up. It's really wet. I'm going to do a couple of practice flicks. See how big those are? Those are way too big. But once you get them where they're kind of small, you can start just kind of flicking your brush, and it will start to add blood. And don't worry, I'll hold this up to the camera so you can see it. So this is kind of a blood splatter. Easy thing to do. I'm going to go on this side. It's a little bit more white. You can see it a little better. Again, practice till your globs are about the size you want them to be. And hopefully you guys can see that little tiny specks appearing. So if you're trying to go for a particular effect, like say a sword just hit somebody, think about the direction of a blood spray. You know, you've all seen those, you know, cop shows. You can kind of have some directionality in there. So that's the easiest technique that we're going to learn today. Any questions about making blood or doing blood splatters? Okay, I'm going to move on. Doesn't look like there are any. So that one was pretty simple. Let me get this out of the way. But that's still not good enough, right? That's just a splatter. I mean, that's not going to win you any awards. It's not even going to look all that great on a miniature on the table. We need something that's a little more real, right? Because blood isn't that thin. Maybe a blood spray is, but blood dripping on the ground or something. We need something a little more meaty, if you will. So I'm going to do the same thing with a couple of different products. First, we're going to take this very smelly E6000. I'm going to put a little bit out of here onto this palette. Again, if you're doing this at home and the fumes bother you, stop using it. Throw it out the window, whatever, because I don't want anybody getting a headache. It is fairly strong smelling, and you know, everybody's different. I'm gonna put a little bit more blood up here. Now for this, all I'm gonna do really is I'm gonna mix this and this, right? But here's the thing, this paint and water mix is gonna act like kind of a catalyst. So we're only gonna have a couple of minutes to work with this stuff. So let me grab one of my zombies. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna make like some blood drips on him with this. So take my toothpick, load up some paint, mix this in. You can see it's already starting to solidify there. I need to hurry up a little bit. So I've got a big glob of it here. Now I happen to have cut this guy's hand off. So I'm going to put this glob here, and then I'm just going to stretch it. Now there are other products out there that will do the same thing. There are some that will do it better. But those, and I'm not even going to mention the name of it, are generally banned in most states in the US, so I'm not going to teach with it. Now, yeah, sure, you can order it online, but I'm not going to teach with it because it does the same effect as this right here. And what I just used is like $3 at Walmart for a lifetime supply versus $18 and waiting 3 months for it to come from Spain. So hopefully you guys can see the entrails coming off of his hand stump there. Put it in front of this camera here. And again, all I did was mix that together. It's already starting to get solid. And let's say I want something coming off of his arm here. Just put a glob on there and just kind of pull it with the toothpick. And you can get some kind of dripping effects coming off of that. And you can kind of shape it however you want to. This works really good for like, say, a long sword. Let me show you this here. So this is an orc that we did in one of my classes. And as you can see, he's been having a pretty good day. His sword got, you know, blood dripping off of it. He's got entrails hanging off of his shield. And all of that was done with this very technique that we just did. So that's a pretty simple one. Yeah, Olaf, if you're in Europe, there's a product that you can get that works amazing. But here in the US, that product is not for sale. Okay, so any questions on the E6000? All right, so if you missed it, I'm using this mixed with paint to make those strings. So let's move right along because, you know, there's so much I want to get to. And I want to show you a different way to do the same effect that works a little bit better, but maybe a little bit more of a challenge for some folks. Now this stuff, I'm sure most of you have seen it. It's 2-part epoxy glue. Again, available everywhere, pretty cheap. And hopefully this will cooperate with me. Let me do this over here a little closer. Here we go. All right, so this stuff, You squirt this out. It's a two-part. One part's a hardener, one part's a, just the epoxy. And again, I've squirted way too much out here. So let me mix this up. You want to make sure this gets mixed up really well. But this is 5-minute epoxy. So when we add paint to it, we're going to have about 30 seconds before it starts to harden up. But make sure it gets mixed up. Now I'm going to take this big glob here. And if I can get it off my stick, just kind of smear it in my paint. Now, there's two things we're going to do with this. First, I do want to show you kind of the same effect and show you how this is better, because it stays thicker for a little longer. So you see how much thicker that is? I fell off. You're just going to run it back and forth to where you want it to go. So that's a lot more thicker, and the better part about this is as it dries, it'll kind of stay, however you end up with it, that's how it's going to stay. Of course, I'm still fiddling with mine, so grab some more here. Now, this works really good on the terrain pieces as well. And we'll do a little bit of that later on. I get my toothpick to cooperate. Not quite drying as fast as I thought it would. But. Get a little more glue. I think I got a little too much paint in that. So that'll happen if it's not working right with you. Add a little more glue, make it a little more sticky. Because all this will dry clear, and all you'll see is what's left over with the paint. Now I got way too much. Anyway, hopefully you guys get the concept. A little bit too heavy there. Because what I like about this stuff is you can sculpt little chunks out of it once it starts to harden up. So you can make it look like some little organs in there and things like that. Problem is this zombie doesn't have enough edges to grab hold of.
And there's a quick question from chat. What was the glue you mixed into your blood mixture again? And once the E6000 and paint dry, can you paint the effect?
You could. Let me show that real quick. Here's a piece I did in the last live class I did for this subject. If you can see here, this is that same effect. There's a pretty big line of it right here. So yeah, it's firm, it's solid. So you can paint it however you want.
And then what was the glue you used for the mixture?
I was using Loctite 2-part epoxy. There are other brands of it. That one just happened to be what was on the shelf that day. Let's see. I want to make sure that it works the way it's supposed to, because I want to use this later on. All right, this is pretty gooey stuff here. Oh, there we go. Now we're starting to get some strings. The more you mess with this, you'll notice it starts to get a little more stringy. Just gotta keep messing with it. There we go. Now it's starting to do what I want it to do. So anyway, you can see some pretty thick globs are possible with that. But even at that, that's still kind of, I don't know, not really where I want to go. if I'm going to do like a scene, I'm going to need something to kind of sell that effect. So if you ever do any like large miniatures, like say a big dragon, you might use some green stuff to fill in some gaps. And then you always get that little ball left over, right? So what I like to do is make little things like here's a little piece of intestine I made, and you can just kind of set that down in your glue. Again, use old brushes. Um, you're just going to kind of paint that with the paint and glue mix. So you can use little bits like this and just kind of glue them onto a miniature using that same compound. And if I can get this brush to cooperate. Let me grab some more of this stuff right here. Using this E6000 again. And a little bit of deep red. And a little bit of gloss. I use most of my blood mix. So all I'm doing right now is using something to kind of paint around those. I want to make it look like his stomach is ripped open. So I use that little bit left over from green stuff and just kind of paint it. And of course, if his gut was ripped open, there'd be a whole lot of blood down there. And there might even be some smaller bits that I want to throw down there to kind of make that look clumpy. Then you're going to have to play with this a little bit. Once it starts to dry up, again, different areas, you may experience different times on this glue. Generally speaking, this glue dries fairly fast, so a couple of minutes. But you might want to just start playing around with this because you don't want it to look like just some glob or something you put on your base. You want it to look like, you know, his organs just fell out onto the ground. Hopefully you guys, I don't have a camera. Is the lighting okay? Can you guys see what I'm doing there? You see this gas, he's got his intestines hanging out, he's got something hanging down here. And you can kind of add to that, you know, depending on how nasty you want to get with it, you can add some strings hanging down. Again, this is total preference. The other thing I would say, if you're going to do a competition and you're going to include gore, less is more. A lot of times judges won't necessarily like having too much gore hiding, you know, what else you've done on the miniature. So obviously you wouldn't want to do all of these effects on a single miniature most of the time. But if it's just your weekend game or you're trying to make an army and make it look scary, some kind of hell spawn creatures, then yeah, you can gore it quite a bit. Hopefully you guys can see that. There's some little strands that I've made hanging down. I'm trying to get this in focus a little better. You guys see that okay? Yeah, and I'll take some better pictures after class once this stuff dries. All right, so moving right along, I kind of want to get to some other things. We've got kind of the basics of how to make blood and guts, but that's still not really good enough, right? It's still not getting the effects that we want to do. So we got to take it a step further. So sometimes if you want an effect to come out right, you need to use some kind of support. And what I found works good is just simple fishing line. Now I'm using a heavier fishing line in the hopes that you guys can see it, but you want to get the thinnest possible. So let's say, you know, 2-pound test line or something like that. Now what also will work really good for this is like a hair from a synthetic wig, like a blonde hair. That works really good for this. But again, I don't have the synthetic wig on today. But if you wanted to have some kind of spray coming out and you wanted to have something to grip to, I'm just going to take the end of this fishing line. All that epoxy is already lined. Let me go to this glue. Just put a little dab of this glue on it. Apologies about the compressor if you guys can hear that. I'm gonna need it later. Turn it off for now. All right, so I want to make it look like this is coming out of his mouth. So I just put a little glue on the end of this fishing line. Just dropped it. I get something that will stick to it. A little glue on the end of this. I'm going to shove it into his mouth. And clippers. I'm going to cut this off. Cut the base. And the other end, I'm just going to poke down into this gory mess that we got going on down here. Now, when this dries, that'll give you, I'll attempt it now, but it may be too early. That'll give you something to kind of grip onto. Hang on one second. Yeah, I'm going to take a little super glue. Let me use a little trick here. Here's another trick for people if you don't know it. Since I'm doing a class and I don't want to wait on glue to dry, I'm going to take just a little bit of the super glue and put it right there in his mouth. And I'm going to get my my fishing line, put that where I need it to be. And then just a little pinch of baking soda will make that super glue almost instantly cure. Right, let me get some water. Fresh off the super glue, the powder. Yeah, now it's already on there solid now. So that's a little trick for folks if you don't know it. If you're in a rush, you need super glue to dry instantly. Just a little drop of super glue, a little bit of baking soda on top of it, and as soon as it makes contact, it like instantly cures the super glue. All right, so anyway, hopefully you can see that fishing line in there now. What I'm going to use that for is something to give my, if you remember on these pieces, I was having all kinds of trouble getting those things to stick on his hands and on his base, kind of going back and forth, kind of fighting with it a little bit to a degree. I use the same thing. Again, the E6000. Mix it with the paint mixture. And you'll see now I can kind of control a lot better where that's going because I've got a structure up underneath of there. You guys see that okay? Again, I'm overdoing this a little bit so you guys can hopefully see it better on the camera. I probably wouldn't do it this much if I was doing it, you know, for an actual project. But anyway, the fishing line gives you something to grip to, and you don't really have to worry about where's your glue going to go, how's it going to act, and you can kind of play around with that thickness however you want to, back and forth. Adding little clumps here and there as you want. All right, so moving right along. Now again, this is why I was saying don't use good brushes. This brush, now that it's got all this glue in it, is almost worthless. Not quite. I'm going to show you why it's not worthless a little later on. So I'm going to put this into the almost worthless pile. I'm going to move this palette. And I want to show you something a little bit more cool. Again, still going for this whole blood drip effect. Progressively getting better. All right, so I gotta alter my setup just a little bit so you guys can see. I'll put this black background here. Now what I've done, I've made a little device so that I can show this technique. And this is kind of cool. Not the device, the technique. So hopefully you guys can see those fishing lines on there. So if we want to make blood drips, there's an easier way to do this than all of this fighting with the glue that we just did. Now the glue effects for smaller things like, chopped off hands, things like this guy, that works just fine. But what if you wanted to have like a pour of glue? Well, there might be a better way. So what I'm going to show you first, this also works. I teach a water basing class. This works for raindrops. So all I'm going to do is take a little gloss sealer. By the way, these blister packs for miniatures, save them because on effects like this, they're really handy to have something you can throw right away. So all it is a little gloss sealer. I'm going to have some seal there. It's going to be a little difficult for me to do this because of the angle, but I should be fine. And I'm going to grab another old beat up brush, get it a little bit damp, not soaking wet, just a little damp. Grab some of this gloss sealer. And see this line right here? If I just kind of trace up and down this line a few times with this gloss sealer, little beads will start to form on their own. And I hope you guys can see that there are little droplets forming on their own. I'm just going up and down it. And it will separate on its own and kind of make little beads. Can you see those? All right, so that's kind of how you can do like some dripping water effects. Well, guess what? You remember our blood mix was just a little bit of paint with the gloss sealer. We can do the same thing with blood. Apologies if I'm in the way here, but just kind of run that up and down this line on both sides of it. Now you don't have to make a device to hold this. You can, the first time I did it, I taped this in between two shelves. You just need the line to be fairly taut. Now, if it starts running like that, just kind of grab that and pull it back up. But you can see little droplets will start to form on those lines. Now, once those dry, those may be a little too thin, a little too thick for you. If they're too thick, you're going to have to do it again. But if they're too thin, then you can go right back over it. So this here is already dried on this side. So I'm going to grab the same mixture. And just everywhere where there's a droplet, I'm just going to kind of touch my brush and just add a little thickness to it. So hopefully you guys can see that.
And someone was asking as well, what is strung up on the boulder?
What's that?
Someone was asking as well, what is strung up on the boulder?
Oh, that's just fishing line. That's what I said to begin with. This is just a regular old fishing line. I'm using kind of a heavier, thicker one. Works better with thinner fishing line. But I had to use thicker so that you guys could see it on the camera. So any kind of string that's thin. Actually, the best to use kind of breaks my rule. If you can somehow get a hold of some fiber optic cable, that stuff works amazing for this. But not everybody can get that, and I cannot. So I don't teach that. So just use like a strand of synthetic hair, fishing line, any kind of thin, clear material. All right. So once those dry, you can come back in. See, like this one on the back side is dry. You can just kind of cut it off and move this out of the way. And you can see, hopefully, these little droplets are all over this line. So if I wanted to make this look like something dripping, say out of this thing's mouth, I could just glue that strand, let me move my hand. I could glue that strand right there on his mouth. It'll look like blood's coming out of the mouth of this demon here. If you did it with the clear, you can, make raindrops look like they're coming off the side of a roof, something like that. Hopefully we'll have time to get to that a little bit later. Let me set that there for now. So any questions on what I just did? Because that's kind of a neat little trick that I'm kind of happy with. Serves me well. So these effects. All right, well, if not, I'm going to move right on. Next, now that we've got kind of the basics of blood, let's talk about a little bit about busted open skin. So what happens when skin gets ruptured in some way? Well, this goes back to that initial thing I was talking about. You kind of have to talk about with yourself, kind of the conversation of how over the top do you want to go, right? How real do you want to go? And what do you want to see? So here's one that's kind of a little over the top. You see this poor zombie has a spear going all the way through him, and he's got blood sprays coming out. So we're going to do that. It's a little over the top, sure. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to take this this kind of asylum inmate who's perished. We're going to put a spear going right through his chest. So to do that, I'm going to take a pin vise. Now be careful, especially if you're younger. You want to drill your finger. But I'm going to drill, and I apologize if this starts squeaking. I'm going to begin to drill a hole through him.
And as you're drilling, somebody did ask, do you just make a batch of those blood and drool and rain lines and store them?
I do actually. Here in I got a little hobby room. I'm an empty nester, so this particular room, I have several strands of that stuff hanging in the closet for whenever I need it. I can just cut off a few pieces here and there. So yeah, that's definitely something you want to make ahead of time because it'll take a few hours for it to dry right. And pin vise is not wanting to go free. Got to do this off camera. Sorry about that. So apologies, I'm gonna go off camera and do this real quick. Because I don't want to waste your time just drilling a hole through a bones. That's the other good thing about bones and bones black. Pretty easy to do this. You can do it on metal too. It just takes a little longer. As soon as I get this hole all the way through this guy, finger check. All right, there we go. So I've drilled a hole all the way through the asylum inmate here. And next, I want to take this spear, and I want to have that going through him. But obviously, it's thicker on both ends, right? So it's not going to pass through that hole. So I'm going to break it or snip it or whatever. I snip it. Probably better. Just going to snip this little spear right in the middle. I'm going to take some of my super glue. On both sides of the hole.
Somebody was also curious, what did you use to make the spear?
It's just a bit. It's a little spear that I had laying around. Not really sure what it came from, but that's the other thing. When I make these models, especially anybody who does any kind of army building, you end up with just massive amounts of bits. So keep those for stuff like this. But this particular spear is just one that I happen to have just laying around. So you want to push that about halfway into the hole on both sides. All right. So you can see now the spear is going through. And I want that to kind of look like, you know, there's an entry and exit. So remember what I was saying about the paint kind of being a catalyst for the glues. So that super glue, while it's still wet, I'm going to take a brush that I just absolutely hate. One that I've been dying to get rid of. I'm going to load it up with some just straight paint. And I'm just going to start pecking into that super glue. And it will start to dry almost instantly. And it'll start making the surrounding area kind of look jagged, like skin is busted open. And again, using another trader. This same effect that I was doing with the E6000, I'm going to use a little super glue gel. Just regular super glue gel. The only difference is, again, super glue dries almost instantaneously when it hits the paint, or vice versa. So I want this to look like it's busting open from the impact. Load up some paint and just kind of jab into it, and you'll start to get these little weird little micro sprays coming off of it. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. So you can see there's some little roughage, right? As it's coming out, it's not kind of clean. There's something coming out with that spear. And again, you could add like, you know, dripping effects and things like that coming off the spear if you wanted to. But for this, we want it to look like it just happened. So go back to that piece we just made, right? Now this is a dry one. Take my clippers, small pair of scissors, whatever you have handy. Cut off a little piece of it. I think I may have found the world's worst pair of scissors. Again, using that super glue gel. Gonna dab the end of it in there. And right at the base of this, we'll just set that piece in. Hopefully you guys can see it hanging off. Remember what I said about the paint? If I just kind of touch this with paint, it will dry it right there in place. And it'll give me a few little strands of hair coming out. So now you can see there's kind of one little jet spray coming off of there. So I'm going to do another one just to show that again because I know it's hard to see.
A question from chat as well. It isn't gore related, but I assume the same technique could be applied to create a spark effect, bullet bounce, or a weapon clash.
Yes, actually, I was going to get to that. These same effects, if you wanted to do like an electric effect, you know, very similar, but you just use some kind of bright yellow or green, maybe even a bright blue. If you wanted to do oil, you use some kind of a like coal black mixed with just a little bit of brown would work. So those kind of things. So again, I'm just going to grab an extra little piece of this stuff we made. This one's a little long, so I'm going to cut it off. And you can notice I'm kind of holding this so gravity helps me out. But then I'm taking this paint and just kind of touching on the super glue to help it dry really fast. Anyway, you can keep adding these little spurs until you got like this example where I put, you know, about 10 of them on there. But you keep adding those until it looks the way you want it to look, and you've got the spray directionality going the right way. Again, if it's a competition piece, less is more. You don't want to overkill it. But all that was the fishing line with the drops that we used into some gel glue to make it kind of look like an action spray. All right, we'll set that there for a minute. All right, so any questions about the blood sprays before I move on? All right. Looks like we're doing pretty good on time. I'm going to move this out of my way. I'm going to keep this blood handy. So let's talk a little bit more about a larger area. So let's take this piece, for example. So you remember I was talking about, I wanted to make it look like blood was coming out of his mouth, hitting the ground, and spreading out. Well, if you remember back at the beginning of the class, I was talking about how blood, as it hits, it's going to pool a little bit differently. Some parts are going to dry. Some parts are, still going to be liquidy and wet. So I took, and this happens to be crimson red. It's just any dark red. And I want to kind of plan out, kind of imaginary line where this would hit. And then just kind of paint a little area where I want my blood to be. And then if you remember, did a little gloss sealer, a little water, a little paint. We did some blood sprays very early on. So you remember that brush that I was talking about? I'm not done with it yet. Here's one from the last class. I just took the tip off of it because I still need a stick to do blood spray. So I'm gonna do a couple of test sprays. So if this water's coming down from, or blood's coming down from here, hitting here and splattering, it's probably gonna spray out a little bit, right? So I want to add a few little blood drops here and there to kind of simulate where it's hitting and ricocheting. May have to move your piece around, get a better angle on it. Hopefully you guys can see the blood drips. But even that still isn't enough, right? Because I want it to look like this has been going on. So I'm going to introduce a little bit new, a new product to the game. I was talking about Mod Podge earlier, right? So this stuff is pretty cheap. I think it was like $2 for this lifetime supply of this stuff. Available any craft store. You know, I've even seen this at like the grocery store. So I'm just going to get a little bit of it out. Down here.
And while you're putting that away, two questions we have from chat are, what are you mixing with the paint to water it down?
Two things, gloss sealer and water. So when I do the blood sprays, I want it very thin. So you can see here it's very runny. If I'm doing just any other kind of blood effects, I don't put the water in it. Now this looks really pink, right? That's because the Mod Podge is white. So I'm going to put that on here. And as you can see, I can kind of almost sculpt in some ripples. Now, as this dries, a little piece up. As this dries, it'll take on the same look as these two here, but it won't be as shiny. See this little triangle here? This is with the Mod Podge after it dries with crimson red. So you'll probably want to go back in, hit it with the gloss sealer once it's done. But that's going to be a little pink as it dries. But if you can notice, you can kind of sculpt some little ripples in there with that stuff. Those ripples will stay pretty small and they'll level out a little bit as we go. Again, in typical Lord Day fashion, I like to take things a little further. So if I wanted it to be even more ripply, I can use this stuff. This stuff you can find at Michael's, Hobby Lobby. It's called Gloss Super Heavy Gel. It's great for water effects. You can make fire with this stuff. And I've also found you can make some really clumpy looking blood with it. So let me get that one out of the way. You get another. Now the thing is, you want to grab a new toothpick or some little piece of wood or something to get this out. You don't want any paint getting down in here, obviously. This is a Gloss Super Heavy Gel by Liquitex. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of it right there. Now this stuff ultimately will dry clear as long as it's not too thick. If it's too thick, you're going to need to put it in direct sunlight or something like that to clear it up. What happens is the outer shell of it, if it's like this thick, the outside will dry faster than the inside, so it'll leave it a little milky in the middle. So, but again, just like the other things we did, just going to add a little paint to it. Again, you know, season to taste here. And you kind of mix this up. And you see how clumpy that looks? So you can put that on that same base and make some even larger areas. So imaginary line of where that stream is coming down and hitting, it's going to be making some splashes. Move this a little closer as we can. You guys see the 3D right there? So yeah, as it's hitting, it's just going to be making some little splashes. So we want some more pronounced ripples in there. Again, some of these Mod Podge rings will stay, but this stuff is going to allow you to almost kind of sculpt in, you know, some very heavy liquidy feeling coming down in there. Go back to my strings. Off another one. So yeah, to the person that was asking the question, it's always good to have these, you know, if you're going to do this kind of stuff, water effects or blood or whatever, on hand. And yeah, to the point, if I wanted to do like some kind of, say, chemical or acid, I would just change my color, you know, use one of these, you know, bright fluorescent greens. If I want to do something swampy or you know, gooey or entraily, then, you know, use one of these olive colors, oil, some kind of blacks or browns. The color is kind of up to you. The effect would work the same. So anyway, we've got this gooey mess at the bottom, and we've got this string that we just made. So you can measure. All right, so again with the super glue gel, just a little dab of it on the tip. I'm going to put this right in this beast's mouth. Now, this piece I actually made using a bit that I got out of, if anybody's ever been to ReaperCon Actual, there's a table where there's all these metal parts, and you can kind of go rummage through that. Well, I found this head from Rotharos, so it's a metal head on a piece of bones, and I thought it would work good for this class. So anyway, I got my super glue in there. I got the other end in there. What I want to do is drop just a little bit of a, oops, sorry, a little bit of the baking soda on the super glue, just like we did before. And then take one of these throwaway brushes, wipe that powdery mess out of there. You can hide it with a little blood. And I'll just kind of eyeball this where I want this stream to look like it's pouring out into the middle of that thing. Now I could go in further and add some thickness to that because it's awful thin right now, but that kind of gives me the general basis of where I want that stream to be pouring out onto the ground. I could also go in and add a few more streams that are just kind of, you know, midway in the process of coming down, haven't always hit the ground yet. Put this one on that side. So you see now there's two of them hanging there. And if these are too thin for you, wait for that to dry a little bit, and then you can use that same method that we did with the paint and the gloss sealer, just kind of going across those beads, and it'll make those drops bigger and bigger. But now you've got kind of a splash effect down on the bottom. You've got splatters going, you've got waves in the blood, and you've got a couple of different shades in there. And when that dries up, I've got a piece I can show you. This is the super heavy gel that we used, the stuff right here, mixed with just the paint. You can see this was just kind of a test piece, but you can see the ridges are in there, they're solid, and they're kind of staying wherever I put them. Okay, any questions about that? So I need to let that piece dry because I'm going to use it for something else. But I'm going to keep going, and we are right on schedule. Okay. So with horror, it's not just all about blood, right? There are other things that happen too. So what else is on this piece here? If you can see, he's got kind of a compound fracture on his arm, a piece of bone sticking out. So that's a pretty simple thing to do. We're going to need a smaller pen vise. We're going to need a toothpick or a cocktail stick, whatever you want to call it, depending on where you're at. And we're going to need a victim. So let's grab this guy. Get my clippers. All right, so I'm going to break his arm right about here, but I don't want to cut it all the way through. I want it to be hanging a little bit, right? I'm just going to take my clippers and cut about halfway through. So now he's got like this hanging piece of arm, right? Then I'm going to take my pen vise. I gotta take this cap off. I'm going to drill a very small hole right in the stump of his arm. Again, if you're young or just starting out, be careful with this. You don't want to drill into your finger. Now, this hole doesn't have to be real deep, just enough to hang on. So then you take this cocktail stick. I'm going to cut just the tip of it off. So I have a little piece about like that. If you think about the arm, there's 2 bones in there. So I'm going to go ahead and split this right here, but not all the way through, just a little bit. Then I'm going to take my, just a little droplet of gel super glue on the end of it. I'm going to jam that up into the hole that we just drilled. And I'm going to go back with my clippers and try to make it look like a couple of bones. Trim these a little bit. So you can see now it looks like his bones are just hanging out of his arms there. Now once this dries all the way up, you would want to paint that, maybe give it a little shading. Now he's one of the gray zombies, but you might want to have, you know, some old dry blood right at the wound. And there you go. There's your basic compound fraction. You guys see that? Is that okay? In chat. Okay. So let's take this one step further. What if you wanted to just go crazy off the top and you really wanted to have, you know, something kind of memorable? Let's take this poor guy. We're going to chop his head off. So you can do kind of the same type of effects. I'm going to drill a hole right here. Doesn't have to be real deep. I'm going to drill a little hole bottom of his head. Okay, so now we have 2 little holes. Now you can use a paper clip or you know, whatever you have handy. I'm going to use this toothpick because it's handy. Because all we need is something to give it a little bit of support. And if you're cutting, be very careful. That's kind of why I'm doing off camera. I don't want to teach bad habits. Okay, just a break. Okay, there we go. All right, so what I've done, just took my toothpick and just kind of broke it in half. Because I only need like a sliver of this. Because again, this is all about action. All right, so I've got this pretty thin. Paper clip would work too, but I don't really want to have the metal in there. And if I can find this hole, okay, so put a little super glue on there, jam that in up into the hole. A little more super glue, put that on that hole. We're going to go back to our E6000. I actually prefer the 2-part epoxy, but for some reason, that particular bottle is not cooperating, so I don't know if it's old or what's happened to it. But the E6000 works just as good. So just like we did at the beginning of the class, 1 part paint, 1 part gloss sealant mixed in with the glue. Take this toothpick, mix this blood mix up first. Almost get it. And then add that into the glue to get stringy. Again, we're going for live action shots here, so this guy's head just got popped off. Now, the story of why his head is going straight up is totally up to you. I'm just trying to show you how to do the effect. So you can see with the glue, I can start forming these little entrails coming off of there. And we can go back to our blood droplets. Can add those coming off as well. So yeah, something has just cut him, or maybe something exploded inside of him, but now his head is shooting straight up in the air for whatever odd reason. And again, you could add more or less to the sprays, however you want to. I'm getting a fresh toothpick here because I do want to play with this a little bit. As you can see, as that glue starts to dry, it's a little easier to kind of pull these into directions that will make a little more sense to you. There you go. You have an exploding head. You've ever heard the expression, you make my head pop off? There you go. And while we're at it, let's think about what cut his head off. Now, obviously, you would need a particular miniature with a sword that's, you know, in a swiping motion, something like that. But for demonstration purposes, I want to show you how to make that spray, like something just cut through his head, sending his head, you know, straight up into orbit and ending the battle unceremoniously. So we're going to take one of these blister packs. So similar to the fishing line, we need something for the effect to hold to. It won't just stay there on its own. So we take just a flat piece of plastic. Blister packs work well. And what we're going to do, we're going to measure our sword. We're just going to cut kind of an arcing motion with the blister pack, but you don't want it all the way. Right? You want to have kind of some strands. See what I'm doing there? I don't know how well you guys can see this clear plastic. And all I'm doing is cutting kind of a little design of how I want basically the blood to look coming off of that sword. In like a sweeping kind of arc. Hold this against something dark. Maybe you can see it better. You guys see it all right? So it's basically just a template to hold the blood on. So the sword, I need to get my blob here to hold this up. Obviously, hopefully you would have this already on a miniature so you can see the directionality. We're going to see our miniature is a great big round guy. So what we're going to do, before we do the blood effects, we need to get this template to hold the blood effects. So I'm going to put a little super glue right along the edge of it. Again, I'm using the gel super glue. The regular super glue would work the same way. Baking soda handy, because we want this to dry instantly. I'm just going to lay that on the sword, sprinkle the baking soda right over it. All right, so shake this off. All right, so now you can see, hopefully, we've got a little template for our blood to go on in kind of an arcing motion, but it's still not very visible, but it will be when the blood goes on. So again, you got to think about your own taste. What do you want to see? Do you want it to be clumpy? Do you want it to be kind of runny like spray? or somewhere in between. I want it to be somewhere in between, me personally. I'm going to take one of these old brushes that I don't like, mix my paint mixture, again, just paint, gloss sealer, and glue. And I'm just going to simply paint that right over there. The cool thing is it doesn't actually have to cover every inch of this. Maybe right around the sword, you got some clumpiness. Maybe right towards the end of it, you got some clumpiness. So now what you got is this sword that has just cut through. Let me make my big round guy a little shorter. This sword is just now cut through his neck in a sweeping arcing method and caused his head to go straight up. So again, you can make any shape you want with this. And again, this would work on anything other than blood. You could do this with water effects. You could do this with oil, acid, alien good green's one of my favorites. But there's all kinds of little tricks that you could do with that, and you could get that to be, any shape you need it to be for the action that you're trying to show. Does that make sense? Lay that over there. All right, time check. All right, so we did the severed head. We've covered a whole bunch of blood. I want to go back to this fountain area. Let's see if it's dry enough. Yeah. All right, so to me, this would be kind of a cool piece to use in like a game session as a piece of like scatter terrain. But to me, it really isn't reading the way I want it to read, right? So you remember down here, we kind of sculpted with this gloss super heavy gel. The thing about that gel, it's going to take it a while to dry, like, all night, maybe even into the next day. But it works just as good, kind of in the vertical plane as it does the horizontal. I want to thicken these up a little bit. So I'm using just this gloss super heavy gel mixed with a little paint. And again, don't worry about the pinkish color that it may have. It dries pretty clear. Need some more paint. And you guys hopefully can see I'm absolutely ruining this brush. So I can't stress enough. Do not use a good brush. Kind of the reason I stress on that so much is I teach a lot of different type of classes, and one of the woodland basing effects classes that I did, a young guy in the class at ReaperCon asked me if I could borrow a brush, or he could borrow a brush. So I pointed to, kind of my little brush caddy that has all my brushes in it. I said, sure, just go ahead and grab what you need. Just make sure you put it back at the end of the class. So this guy proceeds to grab a $25 Winsor Newton Series 7 and uses it to spread super glue. And then didn't tell me about it. so yeah, make sure you're using crappy cheap, hobby brushes, whatever. But hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing here. I'm just adding some thickness to the spray here. And if this gets too thick for you, you can always thin it down with a little more paint or a little more glossy or whatever you want to do. But what I'm trying to do is just show that there is blood just pouring out of this statue's mouth here. Now, while I was talking, I got some of it on his nose, and I don't want that. So you just clean off your brush, and you can just kind of push that off with a wet brush. As long as you do it fairly quickly, it's pretty easy to do. So I can keep going and thickening this up, as much as I want, but you can see it's considerably thicker and clumpier now, and maybe a little more scary to my players who may or may not see this in their game session tomorrow. So any questions about the thickening of blood? All right. And you guys are making it easy.
I do have a
any
separate
tips for
question.
full flesh?
Oh, yep, you got it.
Actually, yes. And I was going to do that in this class, but I second guessed it because in my last class, there was somebody who had a skin allergy. And by showing this, they did not fare well. So what works good for like pulled flesh is just a little Elmer's glue most of us probably did this when we were in school. Um, again, if you have skin allergies, do not do this. But you put a little bit of that on your hand. We've all done this, at least most of us. Then over time, now apologies for the noise. Over time, that'll dry. Okay, mostly dry. But again, this is regular Elmer's glue. We've all done that where we let the glue dry on our hand. It's not dry enough yet. But if you get it until it's just about dry, you can pull this off. It's not dry enough. I'm gonna have to come back to it. So I'll leave this on my palm and we'll come back to it. But basically when that's dried up, you pull that off and then you already have the texture of skin, right? And you can kind of, shape that with your clippers and glue it onto, their back or wherever the skin's being pulled off. That also works really good for burns. If you want to do burns, you just paint an area kind of a dark red, maybe black, and just before the glue dries, just kind of separate it, add some holes in there. You guys can see what I'm doing. But yeah, to do skin, just a little Elmer's glue on your own skin if you can do it. I've not tried this with a glove, but if somebody does try it with a glove and if it works, let me know. That would be great to add to the class. But anyway, we'll come back to that once that's all the way dry. Okay, so somebody had talked about OSL. So I'm going to try to show it like a brief overview. Now, again, OSL is an entire class all to itself. It's not one that can be readily taught, in 5 minutes like I'm going to do. But as most of my friends know, I'm kind of famous for being a speed painter. So all I'm going to do some OSL is I'm going to need 3 colors. I'm going to need a bright red. I'm going to make his eyes glow red. Bright red. One of my favorites, Nightshade Purple. And a little bit of linen white. So the thing about OSL, the way to really sell it is the shadows, right? Because anybody can slap some, brighter colors on something and say, oh, that's glowing. But the way you really sell it is where are the shadows hitting because of the light, and where are those highlights bouncing off of, reflecting off. So for this, hope you guys can see his eyes okay. I'm going to take kind of a bright red. Again, this is the speed paint version. The color in his eyes. First with the bright red. And then I'm going to take a little bit of that linen white and just going to try to put a dot right in the middle of that liquid, that red that's still wet. If I can do it. All right, so now hopefully you guys can see he's got 2 little white eyes. I'm going to take this bright red again and just kind of around his eye sockets, I'm just going to put a faint little area where it looks like, light is reflecting. You guys can see it better over here. Not sure if that's showing up really well on these cameras. But it's all about where does the light reflect that's glowing out of his eyes. You kind of keep adding it in. And you want less and less of it as you get further away from the light source. Now for me, the white dots are a little too big, so I'm just going to kind of glaze over those a little bit. All right, so hopefully you guys can see that. A little bit more of the cheekbones here, and maybe just the slightest little hint of it over on these horn tips. But the way to really sell OSL is the shadows that it would create. So let me get this Nightshade Purple, which is really good for that on any color. So if you wanted to do green, red, yellow, blue, whatever, the Nightshade Purple for some reason works really good for shadows. It's one of my go-to colors. It's on almost every miniature paint in some form or fashion. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to thin this out just a little bit. So hopefully you guys can see. And I'm going to look for areas that would be more shadowed because of the light source. So maybe on top of his head here a little bit, and maybe under his cheekbones. And as you know, one of my favorite painters, James Wapple, says, if you have light, you must have dark. So again, he's a much more legendary painter than I will ever be. But that's kind of, he's the one that kind of taught me this, that you have to have the deep dark shadows to really sell that light source. Does that make sense? If I can get a good view of it. So what do you guys think for the 5-minute version of OSL? Is that something you guys can handle? Okay, quiet crowd. All right, so moving right along. Another thing that happens in a lot of horror movies or shows is rain. So we've already talked a little bit about rain already because we made those water droplets the same way we made the blood droplets, right? So what we're going to do, talk a little bit about a rain scene. Now I just made this little piece. It's just a foam board, and it's been covered with the gloss super heavy gel. And I've let this dry for a couple of hours. So it's still, I can push into it a little bit. It's still not all the way cured. And that's the secret to good raindrops. What we're going to do is make it look like water is dripping off of this roof and hitting this. But before we go there, we want to further sell the gloom and doom of rain, right? So I'm going to take, this happens to be heather blue, but any kind of a gray, desaturated blue. And I'm going to thin it out just a hair. And I'm just going to put some little dash lines, smaller the better, randomly, because I'm trying to sell the rain effect that we're going to do in front of this. So we're just going to randomly put some little blue lines. Similarly, we're going to randomly put some even smaller white lines to make like light is hitting rain that's right in front of the edge of this wood here. Does that make sense? So a little heather blue, little linen white, and we can draw some rain. Now from a distance, so say like, you know, you're making tabletop terrain. This may be all you wanted to do for rain, but if you're trying to do a diorama, you want to be really careful about, you know, how thick these lines are, especially if you're competing. The thinner, the better. These are a little exaggerated so you guys could see what I'm doing, but and hopefully they're showing up. All I've done is added some little blue and white lines on there, and I'm really just trying to create that illusion that there's rain hitting around this wet building. So now that we've done that, we've got some rain in there. Go back to our little raindrops that we made earlier, and they're already dry on this vise. So what we're going to do is cut one off, same way we did the blood. I really got to get better scissors. And then kind of measure, you know, from the roof to the floor, eyeballing. And these scissors are the worst. And keep this little end here, right? Because we're going to use it too. So in this corner over here, we want to have one that's coming off the roof and hitting the ground. But what happens when water hits the ground? It kind of splashes out a little bit, right? So you remember me telling you, I put that gloss super heavy gel across here, and I've let that dry for now almost 2 hours. We're going to stamp into that some little circles. So how do we get the little circles? Well, remember those worn out brushes that I said don't throw away? So just break the end of that off and just kind of push down in here and make some little circles. Because if you've ever noticed in raindrops hitting the street, there's a little ring where it hits. And if this stuff is thick enough, which it is, and it's dried for a couple of hours, you can see I now have some little rings. I don't know if you guys can see it or not. In that gloss super heavy gel. And just kind of put them randomly because you think about water hitting the pavement, it's going to create all these little rings. In the center of that, we're going to put this, this droplet coming off this roof. So again, you could use super glue, but I would preach against it because super glue can turn white on you, and you don't really want that. You want it to be clear. So we're going to go back to our old trusty E6000. You can also use water effects gel. That works really good for this. But since we happen to have the E6000 right here in handy, dip both ends of that into the glue. And then find one of those little rings that we just created. Put that right in the center and prop it up on the roof. Stick it in my hand. So now you can see you've got a little line of water pouring off that roof onto the ground. Now that other little tip that we had, I didn't lose it. It's hard to see the clear ones. There it is. That other little tip that we cut off, we can still use it too. Because not all of these raindrops need to go all the way to the ground. Again, a little E6000. And we'll just kind of prop that on the roof there too. So you notice gravity, you can make that straight. You can see the rain is just kind of coming down. But what happens also when rain hits the ground, it kind of splashes back up a little bit, right? So let's go back to our strings, get some more. The fishing line stand, that was a, necessity breeds innovation, right? It's just popsicle sticks or tongue compressors that I built, just put together just to meet the need for this one class. Normally, like I was saying, I've got a bookshelf here in my closet, but the shelves are perfectly spaced for me to make this at about a foot at a time. Texture's contour putty. No, I haven't used Texture's contour putty. For this, I have used it to fill in gaps. But let me show you this real quick before I answer that question all the way. So we've got these beads on here, right? I want to cut one off, just a single little bead. And I'm going to leave the fishing line above it, right? And cut it off just so it leaves me a little bitty piece, and I don't know if you guys can even see this. It's only about 1/4 inch long. I don't know if you guys can even see it at all. But what happens when water splashes, some of it comes back up in the direction it came from. So get a little bit of E6000 on that. Find another one of my little rings and put that on there like that. So it looks like it's splashing up off the ground. So I'm going to do another one. So again, all I'm doing is taking one of those strands, cutting off a small little piece. I'll make this one a little bigger so you guys can see it. Man, I really gotta get better scissors. All right, so this one here, if you guys can see it at all in my hand, it's this one's about 1/4 inch long. Dip the little round end into the glue. My glue is just about dried. Find me another little circle, and I can have another little splash coming up. Glue's too dry. Hang on. Get my tweezers, get that other. This will cooperate. So anyway, you guys get the idea, right? The water splashing up, dripping off, hitting the ground, bouncing back up, that kind of thing. And if you do that enough, you can come out with something that looks a little more like this. This is a piece I did for a class in RV. Now this was actually a water effects class, but you can see all the little edges of the stuff splashing up off of him and stuff dripping off the skulls. That's the kind of effect that we're going for. Again, this effect would work the same if you got, like, say, a room that, you know, blood is dripping off the ceiling, or acid. You want to do that kind of effect. Same thing, just color it a little bit different. Did I invent them all myself? Actually, no. What I'm teaching is actually a combination of some things that I've discovered on my own, and some things I've learned from friends, and some things I've learned just from doing research, like watching videos. This with the rain, I actually learned that there's a lady in France. She has videos on YouTube. They're all in French. They're all in French though. That teaches the rain droplets. That's kind of where I learned that. And then I kind of took it to the next level to you know, combine that with the blood effects that I already knew to make those blood droplets out of the same technique. All right, so we've covered blood, we've covered pores, we've covered splatters, broken bones, head severs, things going through bodies. What else really comes to mind when you think of horror? Okay, so for me, a lot of times cobwebs, spider webs come into mind. Now I'm going to show you 3 different ways to do spider webs. The first is going to be a really easy way. It's the quick and dirty. You know, I've got a whole bunch of drow warrior that I want their bases to look like they're standing on webs, but I don't want to spend, you know, 3 hours per mini doing a base. I want to do these in a couple of seconds. So this is a very easy way. And again, if you're doing a competition, it's not going to be something you want to do. But if you're filling up a tabletop for your weekend game, this might be an option for you. Just going to take a regular old white base. The cool thing about this technique, before I even do it, this same technique, using your imagination and a little bit of different colors, will also give you some really cool looking water bases. And it can also give you some marble bases, just switching up the colors a little bit. I'm going to take this dryer sheet. It's a used dryer sheet. You want a used one because you want that the chemicals to be off of it, you know, onto your clothes smelling nice, not onto your miniatures. Because nobody cares how your miniatures smell, really. And all I'm going to do is start wrapping it up. So when I think about spider webs, I want to think about, you know, how webby do I want it to be? The more webs that I want to see on that base, the less I would rough this up. And if I want it to look like, you know, there's just a few webs going across there, then I'd rough it up a little bit more. I'm going to try to do this base kind of a mix of both so you can see. But all I'm doing is kind of pulling it in different directions to get, you know, kind of a web look to it. All right, so what I'm going to do, I apologize for the noise. I need this air compressor. And really for this effect, any airbrush would work, or even a spray can would work. Don't need I happen to be using a Soltar 2020 here, but you don't have to have that to do this effect. And again, if you're airbrushing, make sure you're in a well-ventilated area and you're following some safety protocols. All right, so all I'm going to do is lay that across this base, and I want to pull it fairly taut, right? And then I'm going to just spray black over it, all over it. And obviously, it would have been really smart for me to wear gloves, but I'm a Rutarki, so we're not known for smartness. But I just want to spray that whole base with black. If I was doing water, I would do the same thing, but use blue. If I wanted to do marble, I would have probably started with a not white color and used some other marbly looking color. But once I've done that, I can just pull that off and voila, instant web base. So any questions about that? Raindrops. We used gloss sealer, spread over fine like fine fishing wire or just some kind of thread. And if you want them to be blood drops, you mix a little paint with it. All right, so that was one way to do spider webs, and that was a quick and easy, dirty way, right? That base would be good enough if you were making a whole army of them and you just wanted to simulate the webs. But let's say you wanted to go a little bit further, and you wanted to have something a little more cool, something that looked a little bit more like you put some effort into it, but maybe not necessarily over the top, spending a lot of time. So again, we can use our dryer sheet. Get some of this stuff out of the way. And let me find my tower. I'm going to use the other side of this tower just for demonstration purposes. So what I'm going to do, it's a little tricky here. Put a little super glue right here, right here, right here, and right here. So this is where I want to put my webbing. I'm going to get my really good scissors. And by really good, I mean the worst possible imaginable scissors. I'm going to cut out a shape. It's probably a little too big, just kind of eyeballing at this point. You're going to have to trim this. And the same thing, I'm going to kind of pull this out to make it look a little more random than, say, a factory-made dryer sheet. But if you look, as you're pulling this out, this dryer sheet already looks like webs. So why not use what they give you, right? The cool thing about this effect is it's semi-permanent. It's you know, as long as you don't beat it up too much, it'll be there for, you know, pretty much eternity. Now I'm going to start at the top too. I just laid that on there. You remember the trick with the baking soda? Well, it's not going to hurt anything here because the dryer sheet's white. So I'm going to hold this here, drop a little bit of baking soda on there. We'll blow that off in a minute. And then down here on these points, find my glue. I'm going to kind of pull that taunt. Drop a little more baking soda on there. I'm going to find this glue. I'm going to pull that taunt. And drop a little baking soda on that. So once that's on there, it's just a matter of, you know, trimming to taste, and you can make this rough or jagged or whatever you want. And by the way, this works so much better with actual scissors. But you can kind of keep trimming at that to get the shape you really want it to be. Then with these little extra edges, you don't want it to be square, right? Just going to kind of start pulling this a little bit at a time. I'm trying to keep my big hands out of the way and get it to where I want it. I'll drop a little bit more baking soda on it. And again, for those that missed it, the baking soda just instantly dries and cures the super glue. The only reason I'm using it, we're going to blow most of that off. On this side, I'm going to pull this one down. Over here. Hold it with the crackle stick. Anyway, you guys get the concept. You can keep pulling at this and adjusting it until you get just the right web shape that you want. When you're done, grab my airbrush real quick. Just going to blow this off real quick. Blowing the baking soda off of it. But when you're done, you're left with a little bit more convincing spider web. It's now three dimensions. But even that wasn't quite good enough for me, right? So I learned that on a video, and I thought, well, that's cool, but it's still not where I want to be. And this last technique I think it's really awesome. But again, it's a little over the top and maybe a little bit more than what most people want to do. So to do that technique, we're going to have to build a frame. But first, before we do that, I want to show you what our target is. Our target is webs that look like this. So these look like, and I don't know if the camera is showing this up good enough, but in person, these look like I actually talked the spider into making this base for me. So I'm going to show you how to do that. It's really easy, but it does take a little bit of extra work. And it is something that you wouldn't want to do on just every tabletop miniature that you're doing. So to do that, we're going to start with something we want to put webs on, right? Something like this. We're going to go back to our fishing line. And again, we are going to need 3 things for this step. We're going to need baking soda handy where we can get to it fast. And we're going to need super glue. And all we're going to do is start to build a frame for this these webs to hang on. So I'm going to go up here, put that there, drop a little bit of baking soda on there. And again, all this is going to be blown off, so don't worry about making a mess. I'll take another line. Right here, and since that baking soda is already there, it's probably going to dry instantly. I hope. Okay, I missed it. All right, so I can keep doing that, right? Keep adding fishing lines. That's an easy enough concept that anybody could figure out how to do that, right? But by the end, what you want is something that looks like this. If you can see, there's a little wireframe built up there now. Now that's just to catch the webbing. We need something so it would hold up. Now, before you try this on, I will say this is incredibly messy. This stuff gets everywhere, and it's best done in some kind of spray booth, which normally I do. But for purpose of the class, I'm willing to take a mess that I'll clean up, later on tonight. So what we're going to use is that frame we just made, and this product here. It's called Crackle Medium. You can get this at, Michael's, Hobby Lobbies, any kind of hobby store. Yes, Rosario, the 3D pen works great for this if you can get those fairly clear and or white. But I don't happen to have a 3D pen. So anyway, this Crackle Medium, sold in just about any, craft store. It's only a few bucks. This stuff, normally you would paint that on something you wanted to look antique, and it helps you, crack the paint, that kind of thing. So I'm taking a different airbrush, not because I have to, but because this one's clean. That one, the other one still has black paint in it. I'm just going to pour a little bit of that in there. I don't need to thin it. And then let me do a test spray. I'm just going to start spraying that across that frame. Cool thing is, you guys can't see it, but all back here, the spider webs already look way better than this. So you just have to kind of keep working at it and building up the webs. And this stuff is going all over, like my paints and all the minis that we painted. I don't know if you guys can see the zombies over here. They're all covered in webs already. So again, this is something that you would want to use some kind of spray booth. But you have to start building up layer by layer. And I'm holding about 10 inches back from it. Give a little more. You guys see the webs coming off of it already? Check out our zombies. They're like covered in webs already. Yeah, you have to keep building up on this, kind of layer by layer, and holding it at different angles, that kind of thing. Then it's just Crackle Medium. Yeah, about that 3D pen, do they make clear filaments? Because if they do, that would be far better than my fishing line for just about everything I'm teaching in this class. All right, so you guys get the impression. I'm going to have to keep going over this layer after layer with this Crackle Medium. And you can see it's starting to form the webs. But it's still, you know, it takes multiple passes at it to get it where you want it to be. Now, obviously, this stuff's going to get everywhere. And it's going to get likely all over miniatures that you, or even the piece you're working on where you don't want it. You know, I got to clean this out of my airbrush immediately. It's not good to let this dry in your airbrush. So apologies, I have to get this out of here. And just about there. Okay, that's good enough for now. All right, so yeah, obviously you can see there's a lot of overspray going on, and I would have to keep building up on this layer after layer to get to the effect that I've got on this Demon Queen of Spiders here. But the problem is, you may get it in places you don't want it, right? You can see that this is all over her legs. I don't really want it to look like she's trapped in her own web. I want it to look like she's made the web and she's gracefully walking across it. The cool thing about the Crackle medium is both cool and bad. This stuff, you cannot get wet at all unless you want it to be gone. As soon as it gets wet, it disappears. So I'm going to take a big thick brush, get it wet, and then on her legs, I can just kind of clean this right off and move these zombies. So anywhere I don't want the web to be, I just use a little bit of plain water and just kind of clean it right off. Again, you don't want it soaking wet because you want to keep most of that webbing. You just want to kind of go over it to get rid of where you don't want it. So for me, on her, I didn't want her to look like she was trapped in her own webs. And as to the people in my local group, I did respray this just to purposely mess up her legs to show this in class. Because this is actually something that I entered in RCL, Reaper Challenge League, a few weeks back. But yeah, you just keep with your watered down brush, and you can eventually kind of sculpt these webs out to where you need it to be. And you kind of clean her up as you go. But once you're done, and you've done your multiple passes of layers and stuff like that, you can see that these webs, they look a lot more realistic than the dryer sheet. But like I was saying, the only bad thing is they will absolutely not stand up to any kind of moisture at all. But again, that's a good thing because now my paint area is just obliterated with webs, and it's now very easy to clean up with a damp sponge. Just to show you, this is some of the stuff that was in the background. That's the piece that I was just putting the fishing lines on. This is a Lizette that was back there that's in my shelf of shame. A couple of bottles of paint. You know, this stuff's going to get everywhere. So use a you know, paint booth or something like that, or even a cardboard box to spray this into, because it's going to bounce and ricochet everywhere.
Now, along the same lines, I had a couple people asking if that is hard to clean out of an airbrush. I imagine water works the same way on cleaning the airbrush with that.
Yeah, it cleans up very easily as long as you do it fast. I don't want to test it in my airbrush and have it solidify and me have to scrape it out because the water can't get down to where it needs to be. So all I did when I was doing that off camera is I just ran water through my airbrush 3 or 4 times, and that kind of blasted it all out. at least good enough until I can get in there and clean it up, right? But yeah, I'm cleaning up these zombies right now. They're all absolutely covered. Somebody was asking for detailed pictures, and people are going to be wondering why they're all covered in moves. Every single one of them is cobwebs, just all over them now. But if you can see, going back to first part of the class, these little strands we were making with the glue, and I'm hitting them with a wet brush, so they're already solid and ready to be played. Here's our headless guy with his sprues coming out of his neck. I actually might leave that. He's got webs all over him, and I kind of like it. So I'm going to leave that one alone. This blood splatter guy, you can see I just wipe it off with a wet brush. It comes right off. But anyway, I know we have covered a whole bunch of material in one class. That was kind of done intentional because it's such a diverse group that we've got in this class. But by all means, anytime through the weekend, if you got questions, Dave Cecil or Lord Dave, I joke around a lot about the factions. That's all in good fun. I'm actually a fairly decent guy. If you have any questions at all, just reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to, talk you through it. And maybe, time permitting, we can jump on one of those paint table things on Discord and kind of work through some of these things a little more slowly. And lastly, after RVE, I am normally a regular instructor for ReaperCon. You can find me on most social medias, kind of trolling Reaper's Twitch, or reach out to me on Facebook. Be more than happy to talk to you. And obviously, once I get started talking, it's hard to shut me up. So one last final call. Is there any questions or any accolades or anything like that?
So we do have a few questions,
Right.
such as what PSI you were spraying at?
I was actually going at about 35. I'm not sure that would matter a whole lot with this stuff because it is fairly light. You could probably go lower to 25, and I'd probably have a lot less to clean up if I would have done that.
And did you
I'm
have
no
it
airbrush
thinted?
specialist. No, not at all. Straight out of the bottle.
Okay.
Again,
And
this is not on the parts of this Crackle Medium.
how much
There are other brands. Just Crackle Medium is what you look for.
how much of a dry time between layers?
Well, no dry time. You just keep doing it. This one here, the only reason I stopped is because of time constraints with the class, and because I didn't have my air booth in here. When I did this Spider Queen, that was all done kind of in one spraying. I just kind of went back and forth over it until, she was at the level I wanted her to be at.
And Mike
I'm
asks,
very seldomly on Instagram. I do have an Instagram, Dave Cecil again, but I don't check it very often. I'm pretty bad about that. Facebook's definitely the way to find me after RVE. Oh yeah, thank you so much, Francis. I do have a code. Anybody that takes my class, I'm going to type that in the chat right here. There's the secret code that will get you a crown, as your ribbon, saying that you've taken a Lord Dave class. All right, everybody. I hope you had a good time. Thank you so much for participating in the class. I really had a good, session, and we will be talking over the weekend, I'm sure.
all right, thank you, Dave, or thank you, David.
Rosario, yes, I am in a cosplay on Facebook. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. We'll chat more here in just a few minutes when I get back out on Discord.